VAMP, Chapter 12 continued. Alright, I said. I had never planned on telling anyone my story of what happened. I was a little nervous about revealing everything, especially with Aiden sitting next to me. I planned on keeping this to myself forever, but I gathered my strength and spilled my guts. So, when we got to Romania, my father and I located the man who had sent us the tip. His name was Antonio. He met us when we arrived and took us to his house. There he gave us all the information he knew about these creatures that lived under the city streets. He said there were around 15 to 20 of them. He wouldn't tell us how he knew about them. He only said from experience. In retrospect, we were incredibly stupid to believe this man, someone who we had only known for about an hour, but we thought would keep us safe. We offered to pay him to take us to where they lived, or rather my father did, and he accepted the job. As it turns out, he worked for the vampires. His job was to find people and take them back to the vampires for food, and in hopes of one day they would turn him. Anyway, we followed him through the streets of Romania, and then we came to a wooden door in the side of the church. He opened it and walked down these steps that led to tunnels underneath the city. We walked behind him for probably a good 30 minutes before he turned down a dark corridor and headed up the stairs at the end of it. He opened the door, and we were in the inner ward of a deserted castle. We were in the inner ward of a deserted castle. It was surrounded by high stone walls, and it was all dirt beneath our feet. He walked over to these huge double doors and knocked 3 times. The doors opened, and he motioned for us to follow him. I was trying to get Father's attention, but he was too excited. He just looked down at me and smiled, and then followed Antonio. It was cold and dark inside the castle. The only light was coming from the candles and torches that were on the walls. I had no idea what was going to happen. Antonio hadn't said a word since we entered the tunnels, and I had a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized that Antonio knew this castle, knew this route far too well. He was winding us in and out of corridors and finally led us to one of the towers I had seen when we were standing in the ward. Your Grace, said Antonio, bowing before this man with long curly black hair who was wearing a black cloak. Thank you, Antonio, for bringing us these guests, he said with a smile on the corner of his lips. And then he turned to my father and said, My name is Vladimir. May I ask why you've come here? Well, we are a bit of adventurers, and we found a tip about vampires living here. We came to research them and maybe learn a few things from them, my father replied. Now, I'd always thought my father was an incredibly intelligent man, but I was amazed at how dumb he was at this very moment. I could tell that these things were not human. Their skin was so white you could see every vein in their face and hands, and there was a coldness to the room that didn't seem to just come from the castle being made of stone. Father, don't you see it? I asked him quietly. See what, my darling? I see your daughter has caught on to us. Might I add, she is exquisitely beautiful, he said, looking me up and down. And she smells good, too, he added, his eyes instantly turning a blood-red color. Now my father saw what was right in front of his face all along. He turned to head down the stairs the way we came, but there was a man blocking the entrance. I was frozen in one spot. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I didn't even want to breathe for fear that one micro-fraction of a movement might get me killed. I'm sick of you humans thinking that you can just come prancing in looking for whatever mystery or adventure you might want to prove real. We are not playthings. We are not human companions, and we are not your friends, Vladimir shouted. We are vampires, he said, spitting at my father's feet. I'm sorry. My father apologized, trembling. I'm so sorry. No amount of apologies can save you or your daughter now, said Vladimir, and then he got this wild look in his eyes. He looked over at me and started walking my way. He came up in front of me and circled behind me. I kept my eyes on the floor. I was too frightened to look at anything in the room. He grabbed a handful of my hair and put it up to his nose and smelled it. I heard a purring from deep within his throat. Then he moved my hair so he could smell my neck. His hands were so cold, like 2 ice cubes had been placed on my body. "I might just keep you around," he whispered in my ear. Father freaked when he saw Vladimir with his face in my neck, and he charged him. In a move so fast I never even imagined possible, Vladimir was in front of him and kicked him right in the chest. Father flew back into the stone wall and landed in a ball on the floor. He was spitting up blood, and the other vampires in the room were going crazy from the sight and the smell. I was crying at this point, and the tears were just streaming down my face. "Oh, look, you made your daughter cry," Vladimir said, squatting down in front of my father. Then he picked him up by the collar and with one hand held him against the wall. "Domenico, Vera, come hold this man up. Make sure he keeps his eyes open," Vladimir said, and they followed his orders. "And if you even think about blinking," he said to my father, "I'll rip your eyelids off." He turned from him and walked around behind me. "I want you to watch every second of this." My father started screaming. He was trying so hard to reach me, but he couldn't move an inch. Vladimir moved my hair off my neck and bit. It didn't hurt, though, and that's what amazed me. I could feel the torn flesh, and I could feel his lips around the wound, sucking my blood into his mouth, and there was no pain. After a few minutes, I got woozy and felt my knees giving way. Vladimir pulled his mouth away from my neck and held one arm around me to keep me standing. "I very much like your daughter. Do you mind if I keep her? I think she'd be a wonderful addition to our family," he said, looking down at me. It was the first time we made eye contact. His eyes didn't hold that horrible red color anymore. They were the same gray as mine are today. An angry girl broke our gaze when she started yelling at Vladimir. "You can't be serious. She's worthless to us, just another piece of trash. Just drain her and dump her like we've done with the rest." "That's enough, Candida. I am the authority here, and you do not question my judgment. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Grace," she said, bowing, but never moving her icy glare from my face. "Now," Vladimir said, walking towards my father, "do you wish to watch first or die first?" "I want you to let her go and to kill me. Keep me. Do whatever you want with me. Just please don't hurt my baby girl," Father said as tears and blood rolled down his face and shirt. "I'm going to tell you a little secret," said Vladimir. "You don't always get what you want." He turned around and quickly walked back over to me. He wrapped one arm around my neck, and the other hand held my hands behind my back. "She's far too beautiful to leave a scar on her neck, so why don't we leave it here?" he said, and he sank his teeth into my ribs. Within a few seconds, there was a burning sensation spreading throughout my entire body. It was as if my body had been dipped in acid, slowly, 1 millimeter at a time, and nothing would cool it down. I could hear my father screaming at the top of his lungs, but all I could feel were my eyes rolling in the back of my head as my body convulsed violently. If Vladimir had let go of me, I would have been on the floor, flopping around like a fish, but he was holding me up and controlling most of the shakes. It only takes about 3 minutes for the venom to run through your body and change a human into what you see now. But those 3 minutes felt like 3 years. I remember blacking out, and when my eyes opened, all I wanted to do was drink. It felt like I had just downed a bottle of the spiciest hot sauce in the world, without one sip of water or milk. All I knew was that I needed something to quench my thirst, and I needed it immediately. Vladimir was holding me back. I could smell this iron in the room, and it smelled so good. It made my mouth burn even more. And then I realized where it was coming from. Everyone else in the room was dead, so to speak. My father was the only one with a beating heart. "She can't control herself right now," said Vladimir. "If I let her go, she will rip your throat out, and she won't want to. But it's going to be her way of life from now on. So, is there anything else you'd like to say to her?" "I love you, Gretchen. I'm so sorry I brought you into this. This is not your fault," my father said, looking at me and then looking down at the ground while coughing up blood. It was like I was listening to him, but couldn't focus on anything he was saying. I just kept staring at his throat, watching his vein pulse. And then Vladimir released his hold on me. It was so fast, I don't even remember exactly what happened. But I do remember flying across the room, lifting my dad's head and biting into his throat. And the second the blood hit my mouth, the burning was gone. But I couldn't stop drinking. It was like water in the desert. You just want to keep drinking and drinking. Vladimir eventually pulled me away, but my father was dead at that point. He was laying there on the cold floor, his eyes looking up into the sky. Vladimir waved his hand, and the other vampires jumped on top of my father, drinking every drop of blood out of his corpse. Vladimir put his hand on my shoulder and led me to the stairs. He stopped and told Antonio to go back out and get at least 4 new people to bring back because I was going to be needing a lot of blood in the next few months to come. I remember Antonio bowing to Vladimir and then looking at me with this crazy jealous look. After that, Vladimir trained me on how to feed, kill, fight, and live the life of a vampire. For the first year, I couldn't get over the fact that I had killed my own father, and Vladimir actually felt guilty about it. He didn't like seeing me in pain. In a sick, twisted way, he cared about me a lot. I could just never return the feelings, I said, shrugging. I lived there for years. I tried to escape once and was caught. He locked me in the dungeon and starved me of blood for a week. That's enough to torture a young vampire for the rest of their life. Vladimir commanded me to stay with him, and when your maker commands you to do something, you have to do it. There's no way of fighting it, but for some reason I eventually broke out of the command. I still have no idea how I did it, but I just woke up one day and knew I could leave if I wanted to. I shared this information with my closest friend, Rachel, and she helped me devise a plan so I could escape. I moved around every year, sometimes 2 or 3 times, just to keep my tracks covered. I couldn't go back to you or Mom, I said, looking at Adeline. We were both crying. I was so scared I would do to you what I did to my father. And then the floodgates broke. My head fell in my hands and I sobbed. It was the kind of sobbing where your whole body shakes and your shoulders heave up and down, snot comes running out of your nose, and you feel like you're going to throw up at any moment. I felt Aiden wrap his arm around me and kiss the top of my head. Thank you for coming here, Adeline said. I realize now what a risk it could be for you. But I'm so glad you took it and that I got to see you one last time. I feel as though I've accomplished everything I was put on this earth to do, she said, grabbing my hand. I collected myself, wiped my nose with a tissue and said, Speaking of, your house is gorgeous. Finance really paid off, eh? She laughed softly. I was very lucky in my choice of career and husband. She laughed. I laughed too. She told me how she'd worked incredibly hard and went to college on her own dime and graduated at the top of her class. She'd gone off to New York for a bit to work with the big boys. She not only made a name for herself in her career field, but she met and married an heir to the Jameson liquor. They married but never had kids, so they spent their entire lives traveling the world. He had passed away about 2 years ago. I was so happy to hear about the full life she got to live. I could tell she was so tired. Her time was running out. She fought a good fight, but I could hear her heart struggling to pump the blood through every chamber. I love you, I whispered. Why don't you close your eyes and rest now? She grabbed my hand. I love you too, she said, and closed her eyes. Over the next few minutes, her breathing got slower and slower until it stopped. The alarm on her vitals machine started to go off, and the nurse swept into the room. She grabbed the hand I wasn't holding and looked at her watch. I'm afraid she's gone. I know, I said, looking at Adeline's face. I didn't need a machine to tell me her heart had stopped beating. I could hear it slowly coming to a stop. She looked so peaceful. She even had a small smile on her lips. What will be done with her? I asked. She wanted to be cremated. I'll call the funeral home now, the nurse said as she walked out of the room. Is anyone claiming her remains? No, you have full right to them if you'd like, as you are her last living relative. I nodded. Yes, please. Okay, when you're ready, I'll have you fill out some paperwork. Aiden and I sat there in silence for a long time. I had almost forgotten he was there when I was telling my story. I was scared to look at him for fear of what he was thinking. What's going through your mind right now? I asked. Are you okay? He grabbed my free hand and stroked it with his thumb. I'm all right, I said, finally looking into his eyes. He leaned forward and gave me a quick kiss. Why don't we get out of here? We can go for a walk on the beach back at the hotel, he said. I nodded my head and we got up to leave. I kissed Adeline's hand and laid it down beside her. I took one last long look at her and then followed Aiden to the door. After I filled out the paperwork, I thanked the nurse for all her help and headed outside to our car. I climbed in the car, grabbed my locket, and held it tight in the palm of my hand. I could picture it in my head, silver, oval, with flowers engraved all over it. It was the only thing holding me together right now. Aiden could tell I was not in a chatty mood, so we sat in silence all the way back to the hotel.